Hello, welcome to another LSB film podcast with me, your host, Chris with a K. I hope everyone's well. What happens when a doctor who's spent years trusting a system reaches the point where he no longer believes in it? Today's guest is Dr. Dave Cartland, once a respected GP committed to helping his patients. He says the events following 2020 changed not only his career, but also changed the entire view of the institutions he once served. In this conversation, Dr. Cartland reflects on the experiences that led him to question the government, the medical profession, and wider society. He described what followed as a journey from respected doctor to someone who felt isolated, criticised, and shut out for speaking openly. This is his story in his own words.
Are you concerned about all this corruption being rebranded as conspiracy theory? Well, don't you worry. Sit back and relax and join in the conversation with today's guest. Welcome to another LSB Film Productions podcast with your host, Chris Brooks.
So thank you for coming on the show. You have created quite the stir since 2020 or 2021, whenever it was. But it's great to have you on here to tell your story of just how you have been persecuted, vilified and shut out of society for all intents and purposes. So I'm going to shut up and I'm going to give you the floor. So welcome to the show.
No, thank you for having me. It's quite triggering, as I said before we press record, to go through this sorry tale, because it's somewhere between a Shakespearean tragedy and a horror movie. And I was the sort of person 5 years ago who believed in the government and the police and the medical profession being its most noblest thing, and fastly discovered that it was not to be the case. So I guess we go right back to the beginning of why I became a doctor. The obvious answer is because I wanted to help people, care for people, heal people, make them better. At the time, what I didn't realise was I was becoming qualified in a profession that is called medicine, which in the end the end position is you end up prescribing medicine. Surprise, surprise, but you're kind of indoctrinated. I call medical schools indoctrination centres now.
A glorified drug dealer.
Yeah, drug pimp, pharma shill. But I didn't realise at the time, so I spent 17 years of my career, albeit, doling out these drugs. There's many decisions I look back on and say to myself, well, for example, statins, antidepressants, big con. But I was guilty, in my 10-minute consults giving out statins like Smarties and antidepressants. But that said, had a very quiet, successful career. I did 2 degrees, one in biomedical science, which taught me about science behind medicine, root cause, pathophysiology. And then I moved on to the Indoctrination Centre, which was, this is medicine, these are the rules, these are the guidelines. It's rote learning, and you just sat in a lecture theatre being told. And I remember to this day a warning from my one single vaccine lecture, no nutrition lectures, by the way, but it was, do not question the safety and efficacy of vaccines, or you will be Wakefielded. They've now updated that too. If you speak out about the vaccine, you'll be Cartlanded. And that's kind of what happens to people. So this is a cautionary tale.
Get your name trademarked.
I know, definitely. Yeah. Well, yeah, it's been across most of the newspapers recently, but that's another thing. So yeah, minding my own business. Even went to the trouble of having 2 of the darts myself for the sake of my job. I don't know if you knew that, but I'm a vaccinated anti-vaxxer. At the time, no one told me a shred of detail about it. My only defence towards doctors, and the only defence I'll ever get, is they keep us busy. They keep you on 40 patients a day. You're chasing around, holding your bladder, grabbing junk food when you can. In your lunch break, you're visiting patients in the community, and you're back to start for another 20 in the afternoon. So it's very easy. Not only do you positively select doctors for their ability to follow the rules and guidelines unquestionably, as we've seen, doling out drugs, but they keep you busy. And in doing so, you're exhausted, stressed, tired, and you're certainly not at the end of a COVID pandemic vaccine rollout, digging on the evenings as to the Pfizer trial data or the Moderna sex submission, etc., that told us absolutely in plain sight what they were jabbing into pregnant women, children, and adults of decreasing ages. And so that's where the trouble started. Firstly, I was given a jab against my own will, coerced, my job. If you don't have it, you're going to get sacked. And then realising within quick time, that this vaccine, not only was it inappropriate to administer to those groups that I mentioned, pregnant women, children, the issue came around, giving it to younger adults, and it was very apparent again whether you believe in COVID as a separate entity or what. People were falling for these silly scientific rules. I was watching my colleagues, wearing masks that don't work, etc. But the Eureka moment for me was when they came for children and pregnant women. They're two very vulnerable groups of patients, and so I locked horns to my peril with a lot of internet personalities, characters, doctors, scientists, and it became immediately apparent, not only with my interactions with these individuals, that there was a zero tolerance to dissent. If you said anything anti-COVID vaccine or anything pro David Cartland, you would be set upon by not only the people involved in the GMC case, but a whole network of trolls. It's absolutely vile. It's limited to Twitter. And actually, they did me a favour. The trolls wrote to the GMC at the start of my investigation saying that we are a group of doctors and scientists tasked with keeping COVID misinformation off the platform. Dr. Cartland is a particularly nasty example of somebody spreading COVID misinformation. Hence, he became a target of our scientific network. So that really tells you in one nutshell that there's a group of people from the scientific medical community, which a lot of my trolls turn out to be, or ex-military or police, targeting David Cartland. And lo and behold, I've got this exemplary clinical career, academic record, not a mark against me from a patient, nothing to do with the public, no safeguarding concerns. I'm suddenly being contacted almost daily, weekly by the GMC saying, we've received another complaint about you. And that was where it started, the fun and games. I can't remember dates. It's all kind of
merged into one.
Really. But yeah, I've gone from 0 complaints to the GMC to very quickly over a 6-month period, 264 complaints. Only subsequently, after the GMC hearing, I found out what the crux of the complaints were. And they were mainly just doctors and scientists saying, Dr. Cartland's spreading misinformation, stop him. He's affecting public confidence. He's a very naughty doctor. Please strike him off. And the key point there is of the 264 complaints, 259 were thrown out as without evidential basis. There were just people saying he's spreading misinformation. We don't like it. It goes against our paymasters. Stop this man, discipline him. Only 5 things ever got through. And they were pretty frivolous, to be honest. I was accused of 4 counts of harassment and 1 count of falsifying medical documents and creating vaccine exemption certificates. And I'm doing that because that's not what I did, as you can probably guess. So the harassment really, in a nutshell, was me locking horns with doctors and scientists on the internet. One example was an obstetrician who said that the vaccine was 100% safe in pregnancy, long term. Only for me, having not previously been aware of this doctor, I've become aware of her because she contacted, not me directly, professionally, she contacted my business partner, my health coach, and saying, just to let you know, your business partner's a lunatic. I'm paraphrasing slightly. And he's responsible for the murder of pregnant women and children from COVID-19 because he's going against the COVID guidelines, etc. I wrote to her. I said, please, can you show me the data to back your claim of safety and efficacy in pregnancy? Because when I read the Pfizer trial data, I read that they were excluded if you were pregnant, if you're under 30.
Because it was never supposed to be for them, I guess.
It was never supposed to be, but they went down and down the ages, and then they thought, let's go for the kids. They went against the government's own advice, JCVI, when they said there was no clinical indication for the vaccine, and yet they were overturned their own JCVI, Joint Commission for Vaccines and Immunisations. So they went against their own advisors. I wonder why. But anyway, so that happened, and I questioned them via a very polite email saying, I don't appreciate you contacting my business partner, slandering me. Could you please explain where your data is in case I've missed it? I look forward to this data. And if you don't, I will report you to the GMC for spreading misinformation, irony, to a vulnerable patient group. The GMC found me guilty during the tribunal of retaliatory action, threatening retaliatory action towards a female colleague. That's not what happened. I wrote a polite email. And that, like I say, when you look at the actual crux of what happened, let's go from the start quickly. Went to the tribunal. It's done like this. It's Zoom. It's took 3 and a bit years to get to that point. Prior to that, the GMC, without a single word of rebuttal from me, explanation from me, write a letter that goes out to the entire Cornwall general practice community saying, just to let you know, your locum doctor, David Cartland, has been accused of, without any questions or evidence or anything, has been accused of harassment, bullying, falsifying medical notes. Have you got any negatives you'd like to share with the GMC about your locum doctor? So fishing for dirt at the same
proper
time.
loaded.
Oh yeah, without that. And it was very negative. And obviously, if you're employing Dave Cartland's locum services and you get a letter like that, you were on the side of caution, and you're not going to have him back. So very quickly, I was dropped from my very regular 6-7 practices dotted around Cornwall, which ironically I was working at because the doctors were dropping like flies after their second, third, fourth.
Terrible.
So they kind of find you guilty till proven innocent, and then you enter the lion's den. So as I mentioned just off camera, they didn't just bring in any old solicitor and barrister. They brought in as the legally qualified chair. So you face 3 individuals who are going to look at your career and rule whether you're fit to carry on. Bearing in mind, no patience, no negligence, no crime, no conviction. This is internet spats with 4 people I disagreed with that went both ways. And if you put that in front of a police officer, by the way, they throw it out. Because as I well know, and we'll talk about police, I guess, towards the end, is that
this is Operation Tower.
Well, there's civil matters are balance of probabilities. So it's on, who's got the most evidence and where does it land on 50%, whereas a criminal is beyond all reasonable doubt. You've got to be absolutely sure that that person pulled the trigger to cause a murder.
Now, before we get back into our show, a quick word from our sponsors. If you've ever had that unexpected knock at the door from police, a visit from bailiffs, or received a legal threat without warning, you'll know just how quickly confusion and fear can set in. And that's where Willoughby Genius Mark II comes in. Built on more than 750,000 legal entries and across 50 plus countries, it provides immediate legal guidance when you need answers fast. No waiting for appointments, no eye-watering hourly fees. Just direct access to the relevant legal information right when you need it. It helps to verify information, explains your options, guides you through legal situations with clarity and precision. Legal technology is evolving rapidly, and those who understand it will be better equipped. Now, before we jump back into the show, click in the link below, use LSB Pro for £5 off of your first month's premium. Right, let's get back into it.
So this civil matter was based on balance of probabilities. Now, the key is balance. So the first thing you have to do is listen to both sides to be able to balance, correct? Mm-hmm. That's where it started going wrong. First thing they did, they brought in this head of the CPS for violent crime. She was the legal qualified chair for the whole thing. There was a lay member and a medical doctor there with her, just nodding dogs for the whole time. And then they brought in a barrister for the GMC, whose day job is a homicide and terrorist barrister. Shortly after my strike-off, incidentally, and I don't believe in coincidences, turns out he's promoted to High Court Circuit Judge within a matter of days of my strike-off. And I get my old barrister, which, anyway, I won't say any more on that matter, but it didn't really do a brilliant job. And they started. So the first thing they did was they sort of before we get started, we've got to rule on certain things. So we're going to rule on, should we make everyone within the tribunal anonymous? So we put our argument to say, look, Dave Cartland's had death threats, threats of violence. His family have been doxxed. His house has been doxxed. He's been followed physically online. And we put this argument. And then we read that email that I've just mentioned, the email that went out saying, I'm a target of a network of scientists. Then they stake the claim that the doctors involved should be anonymous for their own different reasons, celebrities or whatever. We then went off, adjourned, and I came back 10 minutes later with a pre-prepared, must have took about 4 hours to write, but a pre-prepared determination. And this happened all the way through the tribunal. The doctors will not be known by their name. They'll be known as Dr. A, B, and C, and we'll call a practice manager that was involved. We'll call her Miss J. And Dr. Cartland will be known as Dr. David Cartland, and it will be known by his name throughout. We asked for vulnerable witness status for me. It got declined. The doctors in question, the victims, were given vulnerable witness status. We asked for it to be behind closed doors and private for everyone's safety. They granted it for them, but not for me. This is on the first day or two. Everything going for the victims, and nothing going for me. So everything I said would go out publicly. Now, they let trolls in. They let trolls in to watch. So these people that have been abusing me, harassing me, stalking me, vile stuff that they say about me, some awful things, they let them in to watch. So there were 20 golden tickets to Dave Cartland's glorious demise on offer. 15 to 18 of them end up in the hands of the very people that have been trolling me incessantly. And they still to this day do. There's nothing a lot of what we'll talk about during this interview is stemming from the activities of the vexatious reports from said trolls. I've never come across anything like it. Anyway, the next thing the GMC do is they say, well, Dr. Cartland's got 6 witnesses that he'd like to bring to the tribunal. The GMC would like to cancel his witnesses. He's not allowed to bring any of his witnesses in. We deem his witness statements inadmissible and irrelevant to proceedings. Now, I had 6 witnesses, 2 for each of my victims, and each of the witnesses bore witness that the victims are actually perpetrators. And Dave Cartland was a victim, being baited and goaded and harassed and stalked and gang piled on, and he retaliated, as any human dad doctor would do when you're baited constantly for 3-4 years. Like, piled on. Every post I'd make, piled on. Every post in defence of me, piled on. Same group, same network. And one of the victims of mine happened to be the leader of the said network, and lots have been written about him. They're called the Mutton Crew, very childish sounding, but he's a sheep farmer and he runs this network, or he ran this network, and lots of people have written about this man and his nefarious internet abilities and activities. So that said, they then turned to my witness statement. So I had to rebut every single statement made against me. And there were documents this thick, files and files. I made sure I sent it off to the GMC, the legal team for the MPTS, my barrister, and it was filed, it was bookmarked. It was very neat considering the amount of work I put in. I sent it off to the GMC. First thing they did after deeming my witnesses inadmissible was to say that my witness statement, my own witness statement, my own words were inadmissible and irrelevant. So my own witnesses and my own defence of my own career was 80% inadmissible. So they basically, like a FISA document, redacted what I could use out of my portfolio.
How could they do that?
And then come to a balance of probabilities conclusion. That's what I'm saying. This is and then at the end of this, we then put in a clause. We said, look, nothing's going for Dr. Cartland here. You can't expect him to defend his career based on a fifth of his own defence rebuttal. And I went into some really good detail, loads of rebuttals, loads of statements and mitigations and all the rest of it. And they just wouldn't accept it. And then his witnesses were not allowed to speak. And so we put in an abusive process, an ECHR, you're breaching his right to free expression and speech, et cetera, et cetera. And then we put that in, and guess what? They spent 10 minutes, came back in with a 2-hour, 3-hour, they must have expected it, a 2 to 3 hour document, and just read it out ad verbatim saying, no, it doesn't, we're not striking this case out because, so they've gone into the tribunal, not allowing me any witnesses, and my witness statement is wholly unusable. So I'm sitting there here for 3 weeks, just listening to them tell this tale of woe about what a vile, bullying, harassing, disgraceful, evil human being David Cartland is. And I was sat there listening for 3 weeks, and it got to the crescendo point where I'd listen to this homicide barrister stare coldly at the screen and deliver his opening speech. And for 3 hours, he made me sound like Satan incarnate, literally the most evil human being on earth. And everything he said, I wanted to put my hand up and rebut every single comment. And Dr. Cartland did that. Dr. Cartland did that. And I'm trying to say, well, there's context to that. So Dave Cartland said that to this doctor because he actually called him a murderer and a dangerous individual and Harold Shipman on steroids. Yes, I called him a sheepshagger. I admit that. Unwise, but the doctor in question...
If he's a Fabian, he probably is.
No comment. But that said, I was found guilty by the GMC in the determinations at the end of accusing a scientist of having a sexual interest in the molestation of sheep. Tells you all you need to know. Nice. So that's how it went on. At 3 weeks, we took a break because they drove me to the point of despair. I'm a bright bloke. I've got family. I'm the glass is always half full sort of bloke, but this drove me into...
Well, that's what I was going to ask you. I wanted to say, because if I have something that's nagging me and my child comes up to me and wants to do something, I'm like, oh, God. And so I can only imagine if you're eating, breathing and sleeping, what you're going through for so long, what kind of impact was that having on you and your relationship with your wife, your children?
It impacts everything. So, the minute you decide to become a doctor isn't at medical school or just before, it's the whole life. You gear your whole life from nursery, from when you're listening to the teddy bear's heart with your plastic stethoscope, all the way through to your GCSEs, your A-levels. Every decision is geared to be a doctor, extracurricular or within school, the clubs that you do, the captaincies that you have, etc. It's all to decorate the CV. So when you built your reputation and your knowledge base up and geared everything to be a doctor, and suddenly this witch hunt happens purely because I spoke up about children, pregnant women, masks, lockdowns, and then the vaccine harms. That's it. I stayed in my lane with those 5 points. These are all easy wins. I picked the easy wins to keep it clean. And like you say, of course, it does affect you because they keep saying the GMC's buzzword is you don't show insight or remorse. So doctors can do anything these days. I'll give you an example of a doctor last week who was is given a suspension for a year for having a sexual intercourse relationship with a cancer patient who was 13. But he showed insight and he knew that he shouldn't have been doing it. And he begged and scraped and got on his knees, prostrated himself to the MPTS. And guess what? Got a year suspension. He's still working as a doctor. I'm not, and we'll come to the crimes that I committed. But yeah, it's affected everything. And we adjourned because
He's
they
literally committed a crime.
Yeah.
By
we got a rapist
minor.
There's a BBC article a few weeks ago. Doctor let off for a rape because it was a one-off incident, and they showed insight. All I was expecting from the GMC was a slap on the wrist, social media spats. Bearing in mind the GMC have not ever received any guidelines for social media behaviour. They released them in 24 under a lot of pressure, but they're holding up against me social media things that I've had no training in, number one, and I've not had there's no regulatory guidance on, yet they're holding me accountable to rules that hadn't been written yet. I'm going to have a sip of water on my throat.
No, you're fine. I'm kind of dumbfounded and lost for words because the level of I don't even know what the word is. It's corruption, but it's worse than corruption. I can't think of the words I'm thinking of. But the level of it is out of this world. It's unbelievable. So
well, I mean, ultimately, what they drove me to was that night that Mr. I won't say his name, the homicide terrorist barrister having a part-time job in taking my career down, drove me to an edge of a cliff. Simple as that. Got up in the small hours of the morning and took myself off to cliff edge, and I sat there with a few cans of beer and just contemplated how do I get back from this? If this is as serious as I think it is, they're going to come and they're going to keep coming and they're going to keep coming. At that point, I didn't know as far how they were going to go, and we'll see that as we talk further as to the aftermath. But yeah, went out, took my phone and left a note to my wife, absolutely certain I didn't want to be here anymore. And I talk openly about that, and it all kind of stopped. That night I was there, my wife had called the police, she found the note, and they track you on your phone somehow, even if it's off. But I've been sat on the bench just scrolling through pictures of my kids, thinking about the funeral and the impact it would have. And I got into that sort of depth of thought. And then out of nowhere, this cop, the only cop that's ever been in the last 2 years has ever been empathetic. And I just felt this hand on my shoulder. And, long and short of it was adjourned for 6 months. I was given some support at the time, just about a week's worth of what they call crisis team intervention. They just said it was normal reactive stress for what was going on because your career's up.
But what was going on wasn't normal.
Yeah, it was reactive and it was extreme circumstances. So there was no mental health diagnosis. The GMC then went on to issue that to come back to the tribunal, which they'd adjourned for 6 months to reconvene in, I think it was June, July. They needed to have me psychiatrically assessed by an independent and my own psychiatrist. So that went on. They both deemed me sane, thankfully, because if they hadn't, that would have been another kettle of fish. But they said he's sane, he can come back. It's going to be traumatic, but you need to make it private. But everyone said, you've driven this guy to an edge of a cliff. We need to make it private. Keep everyone's safety paramount. Guess what? The GMC overruled that. My PA at the time wrote letters saying the trolls are watching, the trolls are goading, the trolls are celebrating part 2 of David Cartland's Peep Show. They're all watching, they're posting daily about it, and yet you're letting these people in. It needs to be closed doors. He's already been pushed to the edge, literally. Guess what the GMC did? No, they let the trolls in for the whole duration, and they wanted it to be public. So they went against their own GMC's psychiatrist to say this needs to be behind closed doors. So far, nothing's gone for me, even down to protecting my mental health.
Why do you think that they were so hell-bent on destroying you? And just
great question. I don't know to this day, and I get asked that a lot by police and all these people that we'll go on to talk about. Why me? And then suddenly you start sounding a little bit paranoid, delusional, like why David Cartland? All the other doctors have been left. The doctors that have been struck off for their views on COVID. They've then gone on to just do other things, health coaching or, naturopathic medicine, and they're left to it as far as I'm aware. But for me, they carried on. And the only answer I've got to that is I wouldn't shut up. I saw it as a kind of I had to get, once they put the gavel down and said you were struck off for, the various things that they found me guilty of without evidence, as we'll come to. But I don't know. I've just been quite belligerent. I've been carried on because this is a serious subject. This is, I mean, the bioweapon's done a lot of damage. It's almost, we could talk for 2 hours about what it does to the body, but it's
Well,
bad.
I've just got to be mindful of YouTube and what they will
Yeah,
allow.
it's bad. That's all we'll leave it as.
Mm.
So bad, it's bad. And we'll move on from that. Other than the fact, so the 4 spats, and then basically what they found me guilty of, and this is quite important because we go on to, this has a follow-on effect through what happened after, is they found me guilty of falsifying medical notes and creating vaccine exemption certificates. Now, this isn't the whole story, as I'm sure you can imagine. The story was that I was contacted by an agency rep who works with locum doctors, saying he wanted an appointment, me to work for some of his surgeries. The conversation was about, suddenly turned to COVID, and he said, look, I'm looking for an exemption certificate. I've got urgent travel to get to Canada. Could you help me? Do you do these things? I said, yeah, I'll write letters supporting your decision to say no. That's all I do. This was in a WhatsApp exchange. Turns out he was one of the trolls. Surprise, surprise. He was pretending to be a locum agency rep. And anyway, this conversation went on. I said, I'll offer you a consultation. He said, how much do they cost? I said, I'll do them pro bono. I don't charge for them. Normally I charge an hourly rate of 65 quid an hour, 30 quid for a letter. But these are pro bono. He said, I haven't got a medical reason. I said, you don't need a medical reason. The reason I give the reason in the letter is bodily autonomy. You have a right to say no to any medical intervention, whether it's COVID jab or the contraceptive pill or anything in between. And he then sent me a message back saying, I'll sell you a caravan for when you lose your home. You see you next Tuesday. Do you want it for you or the whole family? And that was the end of the conversation. Now, this had reflected upon Twitter at the time. The trolls were aware of this conversation. They were telling me it was going to the GMC, and it ended up in the hands of 2 of the GMC victims who handed it in on the same day. Same email, word for word identical to the GMC by 2 of the 3 doctor victims. How does that happen? GMC's response, coincidence. Just a coincidence that a troll happened to contact these 2 doctors. There we go. Anyway, that said, I admitted to the GMC at the time, who were going to let me off this. They said, as long as you have on your notes that you were willing to falsify medical records, stays on your notes for 2 years, we'll let it go. I said, no, absolutely not. I've not falsified medical records. I've written letters, standalone letters with my opinion that people can choose whether they do or don't take a drug, let alone it being a COVID vaccine. And so I turned their kind offer of having a blot on my notes. And then they started to twist it. So they started saying, well, he's creating vaccine exemption certificates, falsifying medical notes. We asked the GMC to provide a copy for the tribunal to look at. Guess what? They didn't have one. So they didn't have any evidence of the letters. They had this WhatsApp exchange between me and a troll, honey trapping me into offer an appointment that never happened. That's all they had. And they ran with the headline, Cartland guilty, found proven.
That you wasn't even making money on.
Well, no, pro bono, yeah. And they said I was falsifying medical notes. I didn't. There's no evidence. Falsifying medical notes is a criminal offence. Automatic strike on. And secondly, that's changing somebody's medical record. Secondly, they said I created a vaccine exemption certificate. They didn't exist. There was no such document as a vaccine exemption certificate. And so that said, they said I flouted international policy and rules during the pandemic, but unable to quote the policy or rule, yet found me guilty. Like I say, the headline stand, he committed fraud. He falsified notes and created these exemptions with no evidence. And that was the case. They found me guilty. I expected on the day I was struck off. I'd worked 2 days before. Again, that employment was curtailed by 2 trolls contacting the surgery, finding out where I worked, bad-mouthing me to the practice manager, threatening media, threatening CQC, sack this doctor or we'll act. And then on the evening, I get a phone call and an email saying, thanks for all your excellent work. Thanks for being open about the tribunal, but we're going to let you out the door because we don't want the controversy. That was a cowardly email by the senior partner that I've been working for 8 weeks. So 2 days before I'm working, and then they read the ruling out, erasure. I was expecting slap on the wrist, some social media training. That was it. They asked me to show insight. I showed insight. I said, look, I regret my part in this, but you've completely ignored context and my witnesses, etc. They said I didn't show any remorse or insight. Well, how can you if you've not been able to tell your side of the story of this contextless harassment? And they made their ruling that it was erasure, but it wasn't just erasure in a month, which is normally they give you a month to clear out your locker, as it were. They did it immediately. And the immediacy of it was because I was, quote, a danger to the public. I was negatively affecting the public confidence, sweet irony, in the medical profession. And I was negatively affecting public perception in COVID jabs. And that was it, the ruling done. permanent suspension for the rest of my life from being the doctor I always wanted to be, the caring, good, kind. I always used to go, always beyond. I never stopped at just like my job as a GP. It was always beyond. From my junior years all the way through, I'd always gone that little bit extra to then be struck off and branded a danger to patients. There were no patients involved, no negligence involved, no crime committed, and yet I'm watching all the doctor colleagues in the local papers and saying this doctor let off for rape. There's a doctor who had sex during the patient's operation, nipped out, had sex with a nurse while the patient's under anaesthetist, nips back in, gets on with his job, and he never got struck off. He got a month suspension. Loads and loads of comparators, and I'm saying, well, where's the proportionality? Not only the abuses of process heard, how can you have a tribunal when he's not allowed his witnesses, etc., but then how can you strike him off and not them for what they've done? And it's something I struggle with today.
Yeah, well, the only real reason that I could possibly think of that makes any sense is that in a satanic world, when you're doing bad stuff, you kind of get away with that. But when you're doing something that's actually good and for humanity, it's like, no, can't have that.
Well, it's this inverted world, isn't it? It's inverted and it's completely upside down. And maybe, I mean, we said at the very end, we used the example, my barrister, things like the thalidomide scandal, the blood transfusion. We even used the post office scandal, saying, look, these things have a way of taking 20, 30, 40 years to come out. The evidence is already moving towards Dave Cartland having some, at least at the very basic level, there's some reason for doubting the safety and efficacy. Now we've been given, the floodgates have opened, and, it's beyond no reasonable doubt. Every day I can send anyone who asks 10, 15, 30 articles showing some element these things aren't the safe and effective that were sold.
Have you had one person, just one person, come to you and say, especially since what's since come out, say, sorry, Dave?
Absolutely zero apologies. Not one. Secondly, I get a lot of private messages from doctors, nurses, paramedics. Even in my last stint as a doctor, people were coming in my room, hugging me, keep going, you're doing really well, you're so brave, you've got balls of steel, this, that, and the other. And, but making sure that no one saw that they were in my room, like sneaking in, asking me how to deal with vaccine injury. They were seeing it. We've seen this big move now to people asking, how many have you had? Whereas before people would say, yeah, it sounds like if you had the jab yesterday and today you've had a stroke, could have been the vaccine. But that's quite a big move, because at the beginning it was absolutely not. It's just a coincidence. Correlation doesn't equal causation. Whilst telling them they've got long COVID, they catch all of everything.
Saying gets on my nerves.
I had a patient literally have a stroke after the vaccine, the week after, and the diagnosis was the vaccine did not cause a stroke the week before. It was asymptomatic long COVID. Remember that concept? The killer disease, so deadly and so bad, one of the symptoms was no symptoms.
Yeah.
This is the insanity. And I'm looking around at my colleagues who've done no immunology, no microbiology. You do that all in your, I did that in my first degree. You get one lecture in immunology. And like I told you, you get a warning. Vaccines are the golden car. Speak out at your peril. And so that was it. From one day to the next, struck off, jobless. Reputation then started to go into tatters. The media caught, particularly the local media. They wrote a good 10 articles plus about me in a 2-week period. And even that, you put in a complaint about the journalist saying, look, fair game, write an article about me if you want to, but not 10 in 2 weeks when I'm at my most lowest. And the circumstances. And what
they
about
don't care. They're
my right
vultures.
to? No, absolutely not. I mean, he wrote an article in the middle of Pride Month, and the headline was "Inside the Warped Mind of Cornwall's Own Dodgy Struck-Off GP and His Homophobia." In the middle of Pride Month, that went out to the whole of Cornwall. And I'm not homophobic. I mean, anyone look up that article. It's there. I tried to sue him. You need 50 grand to start the process, for defamation of, and this is an organisation that owns the whole of the media, Reach PLC. They own the whole of mainstream tabloid and mainstream legacy media. And so, how do you fight? I mean, David and Goliath, but without the stones, because I've just been given my marching orders from a 6-figure salary. So like I say, all that went out. I encourage your listeners, viewers, to read that article, because what they did was they spent ages going through all my Twitter account and looking for things that they deemed homophobic. So they found an image that I put up of a singer, Sam Smith, And he was basically just wearing a garish outfit, inflatable shoulder pads, a big feather boa, looked a plonker. And I just said, human evolution above this image. That was deemed as the worst homophobic post that I put. There was another post that said, this is
Oh,
a
I
man.
could come up with so much more than that.
Well, it said man, woman, boy, girl. And this is and it had a man with an umbrella above the family with a rainbow falling down. And it says, I'm a father and I'm protecting my children from gender confusion. That was homophobic, apparently. It's got nothing to do with sexuality. All of my views are on the trans side of the coin.
I'm not homophobic, but I am dead against pride.
And most gays are, and we've seen this in this year's Pride.
Pride is one of the deadliest sins.
It is. But I mean, I've just literally put a video of a man in a frock, short skirt, dancing at one of the Pride events, and it's just kids. It's like a playground setting, and he's just jerking his pelvis and twerking in front of these kids, and no one's raising a safeguarding concern. I've always been, ironically, championing safeguarding for children and pregnant women. And that used to be a sort of part of my practice as a doctor. And ironically, as you'll come to hear now, I'm a safeguarding risk to children. And that's bled into my sort of cancelling every part of my career.
See, that I can imagine hurts more than you losing your job. I imagine losing your job is humiliating and it's soul destroying, but I imagine being called a safeguarding risk against children probably, I might be wrong, but I'm assuming it cuts a lot deeper.
Well, you may have noticed I've not mentioned so far the word children, child, or minor. It's because they're absent from anything to do with the GMC case. There is no child, children, or minor mentioned. Unfortunately, what the GMC then do after you're struck off is they forward it on, and they're duty bound to defend them. They have to. If there's and they found it, they called it serious misconduct. So you've got this doctor having sex with a 13-year-old patient. That's not serious misconduct. David writing 5 letters supporting bodily autonomy and having bilateral spats on the internet, which they only listen to my retaliatory aspect of them. They could have said anything. They didn't care. One of the doctors called me, like I say, a murderer, a baby killer, and I went back to this woman and called her an evil bitch. And they looked at, he called a doctor an evil bitch. He wrote a threatening email, No, it was part of a bilateral exchange between 2 doctors. And that's not harassment when 2 people are rowing. It's called a row, an argument, a spat. But going back to the next thing the GMC did, so I'm licking my wounds. I've had a month in bed. They offer you an appeal. The appeal starts at 12.5 grand plus VAT, as well as if you lose, you pay the GMC's costs. Now, their barrister's on 6 grand a day, according to their website. The legally qualified chair was on 6 grand a day. So I could have spent 20 grand and probably their costs on top if I lost. You're speaking to the same wall, the brick wall that you spoke to. So I let that month go with the plan to do a judicial review. And I raised for a crowdfund of 50,000. So it's gone up now from 20 to 50. I raised for a crowdfund £50,000. And at the point it hit 50 grand, I got hit with the civil litigation for 50 grand, which completely took that money. Talk about, and it's not coordinated or anything, but
so they're watching you.
Yeah, they saw my crowdfund hit the figure. And again, I can't say too much about that, but there was a civil litigation that cost me the exact money that would have been my comeback, my judicial review, get an external judge. As bent as the judiciary is, at least another set of eyes outside of the MPTS that would have listened to my witnesses, would have looked at these abuses of ECHR, abuses of process. I mean, how can they justify not allowing me my witnesses? Particularly when you read the statements. They're hard. I only picked 6 for a reason. I could have picked 100. I streamlined it to 6 for particular reasons to demonstrate points. And they weren't allowed to speak. And that's unprecedented because every other doctor that got struck off was allowed witnesses unless they declined. This was a ruling meted down by the GMC. You're not allowed to use them. So anyway, that then passed on to the DBS, which the DBS is the new branding of what used to be called the Criminal Records Bureau. The clue in the title, Criminal Records Bureau. And it's for people who employ third parties to screen their future employees for, are they a convicted villain? Are they a criminal? If they've been found guilty by a judge, jury, police investigation, and been found on the guilty side of what happened. And so they've changed it a little bit to allow for the next part, which DBS now means you need to have committed a crime or you need to have demonstrably harmed a vulnerable adult or a child. That's it. That's what the website states. Crime, demonstrable harm to vulnerable adult or child. That's it. So they wrote me a letter Halloween. It came on Halloween. Again, no coincidences. Halloween night, open the door, expecting trick-or-treaters. You get this bundle come through. Minded to bar notice. We've been forwarded your case from the GMC where you were found guilty of harassment, falsification, medical notes, da-da-da-da. No, I'm sat there going, well, no, I didn't do any of that. But anyway, so they give you 8 weeks to rebut. So I got a barrister involved, cost more money when you broke. And then I got 10 witnesses to write statements saying they were safeguarding experts, head teachers, politicians that I know, influencers that I know, to write 10 really rock solid statements saying, you can't put him on the DBS list. He's not committed a crime. He's not harmed anyone. And it's just to do with Twitter spats online and letters that no one's seen. Really good letters. And anyway, the fateful day came and they sent me the barred letter, which I've got next to me here. It's got a few dark marks in it, but that's another story. And it basically explains why I should be barred. And the decision made was to bar me from working with children and vulnerable adults for the rest of my life. So I've just been cancelled from my career.
Shocking.
And then you're told that you can't work with children. Now, a lot of my refereeing, and we'll come to that, my refereeing career was my distraction from all of this. I really went heavy. I'm a football man. I live it, I breathe it, I watch it, I play it, although my playing career had come to a natural end. Knees had given up. But the DBS obviously made their decision. You're banned from children, vulnerable adults. And you got a chance to appeal. I'm still waiting to have it appealed. Like I say, it really limits your ability to work. So not only have I had the reputational damage and headlines and the name dragged through in the mud, the loss of career, all I've ever been able to do is be a doctor. So it's a bit like, being an actor all your life, suddenly losing your acting career. What do you do at 44 years of age? I'm about to turn. And so, you're applying for jobs and people aren't getting back to you at minimum wage all the way through to science. You put your application in CV and obviously people will be like, well, why is he asking to work in a Yodel or Amazon drivers and all that? Well, we'll Google him. Google me. It's not pretty. It's not pretty at all. I wouldn't employ David Cartland based on a Google search. But that said, obviously, I'm minding my own business. I'm refereeing happily. I'm looking into my coaching badges. All my weekends are taken up with refereeing open age men's football on a Saturday afternoon. 22 blokes who think they're Cristiano Ronaldo, slugging it out. It takes a lot of balls to take on a refereeing job for minimum wage. And on the weekend, I do youth football, 2 matches youth football in the morning, a women's match in the afternoon, or a vets game, depending on kickoffs, and put my body through it, 4 matches, contributing to Cornwall's grassroots level football. I was very open with them about DBS. I said, look, this is going on. The word from the FA was, well, they're not going to uphold it because it's ridiculous. Why would they put it on the barred list? So I carried on reffing to my 64th game. I got promoted this season to the next level up. So I was looking forward to a better brand of football. And then I get an email from the FA, and the FA state, just to let you know, we've received DBS documentation that you're to be barred from children and adults for the rest of your life. We're now going to ban you from all of football for an interim suspension of 6 months while we get to the bottom of it. And that includes playing football, refereeing open age veterans and super veterans football. Now, those 4 activities you don't need DBS requirement for. DBS bans you from unsupervised. That's the key. You can't be alone. If you've committed a crime against a child or vulnerable adult, or you've been convicted, you don't want to be taking a busload of kids to. There's got to be safeguards against that. No one would argue otherwise. But for a guy who's written 5 letters, it's disproportionate. But that said, they passed that on. They said it's interesting because the DBS. We touched on this before we pressed record. The key that they've gone for me is the fact that I wrote these 5 letters. They've ignored the rest of it. And in the letter from the DBS barring service, they wrote something to the effect of, I remember it because it's etched on my brain because it's such a weird statement. When considering your risk towards children and our decision, ... you were found guilty by the GMC Tribunal for allowing your own ideas and opinions to overrule safeguarding rules and policy during an international pandemic. If you were to work with children in the future, you may allow your own ideas and opinions to overrule child safeguarding policy in the future. So just in case, we're going to ban you from working with children for the rest of your life. So they've gone from a leap between writing 5 letters, non-charged, supporting bodily autonomy to adults, to breaking rules and international policy that no one's able to cite, quote, or even show the letter of. There's no evidence here. If they show a letter saying Dave Cartland's made up that this person's got asthma, when they haven't got asthma. You've got me banged to rights. Even then, is it still proportionate to ban him from everything, working with children, etc.? I would argue against that, but I didn't. I spoke to Joe Bloggs. He doesn't want the vaccine, and I'm a doctor, and using my medical credentials, I stand with him and his right to refuse consent with capacity. That's what the letter said. Anyway, the FA's opinion was you're banned from everything. They banned me from all things that I'm not barred from. As I mentioned, unsupervised, regulated activity with under 18s and vulnerable adults. So when I do a youth match, I turn up, you go to the restroom, you get your gear on, you get your flags and your whistle, you do the pitch check, shake hands with the managers and the captain. There are 100 parents around the pitch. There are 22 lads on the pitch, or girls. There's a coach, DBS checked, another coach, assistant manager, physio, etc. So it's never unsupervised. So how can they justify that? They went further and they banned me from attending any online modules to keep up to date with the laws of the game. I'm not allowed. They do a monthly meeting where the refs get together over a Zoom. You're banned from that. You're banned from taking your son's friends to football training on a Thursday. So you can imagine the embarrassment. I'm to pick up the phone to the parents who's entrust their children to me every third Thursday. We've got a rota, it works well, for Thursday night training in town. And I'm ringing them up saying, I'm sorry, I've been put on the DBS list. It happened with my playing career. I just found a football team that specialises in mental health for men. Speak Out United, I'll name them, they're brilliant. And I joined their team for a Wednesday, very, very relaxed game. And there was a fat club kind of thing. I was piling on the weight at the time for Plymouth Argyle. I signed up for both to play. DBS banned me from, FA banned me from playing. So I had to ring up both organisations saying, just to let you know, I'm banned from playing. Now, you don't need a DBS to play. There are numerous Premier League footballers, high-end Championship League 1, League 2 footballers who've done time in prison. I read a list out at the FA hearing recently saying, well, how are they not on the DBS list? They've committed a rape. They did 2.5 years. This guy's done drink driving. He's done 6 months, killed someone. You know what? Why is he still allowed to coach football, and where's his DBS listing? No one can answer.
So you need to find someone rich who can help you.
I'm waiting. I'm waiting for the guardian angel. I really am. It's come down to that. My resources are spent. I've got nothing. I'm barely earning anything. My wife's keeping us going, and the prospects are pretty bleak in terms of earning money. I'm doing my health coaching. That sort of ticks me over a little bit. They're coming after that. They're even trying to get my medical degrees rescinded. They're writing to the Birmingham University Medical School saying, remove this man's medical degree. This is the same trolls I mentioned. And these trolls, they're not just the normal average trolls. They're so utterly fixated. There's no limit. I mean, one of them actually owned up an account, and I'm not going to give them the credibility by naming who they are, said, I am personally responsible for getting Cartland struck off, getting DBS listed and banned from his hobby. And then somebody commented saying, when will you leave him alone? How far are you going to push him? Not until he's in a cell, padded or otherwise, and his medical degrees have been stripped and his business closed down. And then he put at the bottom, suck my balls to the person who. These are the vile characters that are, and then you go to the police to try and report. Police do nothing. Meanwhile, I've received 3 interviews from the police that have been thrown out, because that's another tactic. They report you to the police incessantly. So the police just say, let's get him in for interview. Let's have a word. And the last interview I did, I took a pile of evidence in. Guess what the police did? Refused to take it off me. So they're interviewing me about me harassing an harasser. It's so twisted. And I took in a pile of information to show that actually the person I'm being interviewed about is actually the perpetrator, harassing me. And the cops literally wouldn't touch it. They wouldn't. I prepared a memory stick like this with all the files of all the trolls, all the cyber stalking, harassment. We've had some vile emails sent to me, to my business account, about what these trolls are going to do to my wife, sexually explicit things, horrendous. Give it to the police, nothing. Meanwhile, I'm going in to be interviewed under caution. That's the latest tactic to try and break me yet further, and brazenly, openly boasting about it. And you go into the cops and you try and say, look, this is a very organised group of people. It's very clear. It's all on this memory stick. Just look at it. And they won't look at it. Funny that. And it turns out then that some of the trials are ex-police, ex-military, very much linked to medicine, or at least around medicine. So ex-nurses, ex-doctors, ex-scientists, because we identify a few of them. And most of them are anonymous.
There's probably like cult club tactics going on as well.
People say, well, why, like you said earlier, why you? Why are they carrying on now? I think my assessment of it is it must have been something like a paid thing to start with. And now it's just become sadistic fixation. I think they just enjoy it. I think they just enjoy kicking a man when he's down. They took my career, put me on a criminal list, and they banned me from my beloved football, and they still won't stop. And you try to get justice, and it costs thousands and thousands of pounds, and
which is corrupt in of itself.
And you're talking to judges that are quite open to a backhander. So why waste thousands and thousands? I've been told now if I do a judicial review, it'd be 50, 100,000 quid to take it to High Court to get judged, and even then I'm out of time because they've meted out a lifelong sanction. You get in 5 years' time, I get to take it to the GMC to try and apply for my license back, but you have to jump through so many hoops. You've got to show you're rehabilitated and you're remorseful and you've had remedial training in what? I don't know what I need remedial training in, because I still to this day don't know what I've done to deserve the sanction that's been meted out on me. I wouldn't mind admitting, and I've said it before, I retaliated unwisely. It's all I've done. I've been goaded and baited, images of my wife, mentions of my kids, where they go to school, what clubs they go to, followed physically around, photographed covertly by people, posting the images up of me walking my dog and watching the local football team. The latest is I'm a paedophile, because obviously I'm on a children's barred list. So people are saying, well, we've heard his videos and his podcasts and his explanation as to why he's barred from working with children. But that can't be right. Surely they wouldn't put him on a barred list for life for working with children. And that's why often I'll have the letter here and I'll read it out. And I'll say, look, this is what the letter states. There's nothing to do with children. But to finish the story on the FA, I sat last week. It was a very expensively assembled panel of people. So one was the FA's KC. I think he's a magistrate judge. He does high-end criminal court cases. FA had the independent chair for the tribunal was a guy who was about as independent. I can't think of an analogy here, but he basically worked for the FA 3 months ago, and he's the independent chair for the appeal. And
about as independent as a BBC investigation.
Well, I mean, exactly. Well, this guy's a High Court judge. Again, they're not by random, like they brought in these big dogs for the GMC. They brought in the top end FA Casey and this guy who's not independent yet claiming to be independent to rule on it. And this guy's doing elite Premier League sports, regulatory matters and safeguarding matters. This guy does Premier League football, Premiership rugby, right at the top. What on earth is he doing sitting in a meeting talking about David Cartland's ability to play in the St Piran's League Division 4 grassroots pub football? What is he doing? But there's no coincidences here. And then they brought in some safeguarding specialists, so two social workers, two safeguarding experts who sat in the panel. And I put my case to them with a friend. And we said, look, well, you can't ban him from things he's not barred from. Can you at least lift the playing ban? There's no justification for that. You can't ban him because he's not barred from that. You don't need DBS. Why have you banned him from open age vets and super vets? They couldn't answer. He said I broke rules. The reason I'm a direct safeguarding concern to children is I showed propensity to break rules and a lack of insight and remorse. That's all they had. And I said to them, I put my hand up, I said, can you tell me the rule? You just said in your submission I broke a rule. Which rule? And he said, and international policy. I said, name the international policy. He couldn't. And then I got told to stop by the chair. He said, you're interrogating the council. I said, I'm just asking for clarity. You've just made a statement about me. I'm asking you to clarify what rule. And no one can answer. From the GMC, MPTS, DBS, anyone along this chain of dominoes that have gone down can say what rule I broke. There wasn't a rule. There were letters saying this person's right to say no is valid. And as we know, medical ethics went up in flames, didn't we, during COVID on so many levels. The silly rules and, the totalitarian dystopia that we've all just lived through. And that's it, really. That's the tale of woe. So I'm literally stripped of my career. I'm put on a criminal list despite no crime. My name amongst transgressors. And I'm banned from my hobby. I went to watch my son play yesterday in a tournament and they were desperate for refs. And I could have stepped on that pitch and helped. I'm an experienced level 6 ref now. And no, I can't, because if I step on that pitch with a whistle, ironically, I've been done for whistleblowing and I'm banned from blowing my whistle now. And I couldn't referee. I mean, there's been approaches. Can you do our pre-season match? I said, I can't. I can't do it. And they contact me because I know I'm a good ref. And there's nothing football related. This is what we said to the panel. Anyway, they went away. They adjourned. They came back again an hour later and said, we uphold the suspension. So the suspension runs till the 9th of August, and then it turns into, if unless a miracle happens, a full life ban from football. Everything, despite not committing a football offence. I never had a yellow card in my football career. Read into that what you will. I was a centre mid, no yellow card, so probably not a very good centre mid. And you know, I never got done for dissent for a referee. I never had a detention at school. Nothing in my medical career. I never had a complaint as a doctor from patients. And suddenly, you know, I've got 20 years left in me as an NHS doctor. And I think I'm the sort of NHS doctor that people really need to see, rather than the ones that, you know, are doling out COVID jabs even this morning. You know, people are giving out the spring booster in, what is it now, mid-July? Spring booster gives you a clue.
Is there any, not that you should have to, obviously, but is there any way that perhaps you could, I don't know, move country, and where you could do your doctoring and football without, is that limited only to the UK?
The problem is that you've got to get potentially equally corrupt organisations to look past what's happened and say, well, yeah, there's obviously corruption here. The FA have gone way beyond and overreached here. The football side of it. If you go to America, you have to have a certificate of good standing, which is a letter saying you are not struck off. My problem being that I have been struck off. Still, when I say it out loud, it doesn't register how final that is. Struck off for something that I am absolutely passionate about. You know, I used to give blood, sweat and tears for my patients. I fought that extra mile for every single one. And here I'm now, I don't know what to call it. Well, they call me in the headlines, I'm a disgraced GP. I'm a bully. I'm a harasser. I mean, the media took the refereeing and the DBS decision. I was in the Express, the Mirror, the Sun, again, all instigated by the local rag, Cornwall Live. And they put out this article to all these national, because they're all Reach PLC. And it was something like disgrace GP, not only struck off for being an internet pest, but now banned from working with children and refereeing. And again, people will see that headline. And I've had it from people on our side saying, well, there's no smoke without fire. Surely you must have done something to a kid somewhere along the line. You know, I had a guy at the football yesterday say to me, well, I kind of presumed that something had happened with kids. And I went through the whole story, and he just couldn't believe that these sanctions had been handed down. And then I bumped into one of the captains of one of the teams that I used to ref last year, and he recognised me. He said, Dave, there's loads of rumours going about you. What's going on? And he said the rumour in his football club was I was a paedophile. He said, I know you. You've refed me 3 years in a row, 2 years in a row. We played against each other on many an occasion. He said, I can't believe it. And I'm glad I bumped into you today. And I just said, look, you know, if I was one of those, I'd been arrested, put in prison. There'd be some evidence. And I certainly wouldn't be allowed to watch an under-9s, under-10s football gala. You know, so there's nothing. I said I can show you the letters if you want as to why I'm barred. This is why I plaster it all over social media. I'm transparent on everything. You know,
well, at this point, you have to be, just to cover your own arse from attacks from demented people thinking that you are something you're not.
And that really upsets me, because people have said, even on our side, no smoke without fire. And even on the awake influencers and doctors that have spoken out, people have backed off, because kind of almost to associate with me is to kind of like cheapen their say this now.
By association.
Yeah, exactly. And people won't. So I've had to, like I say, I've come out this week and said, you know, I need to shed some light on this scenario, because personally, you know, I want people to see that, you know, this isn't just a regulatory council. This has been total life demolition. It's been everything I was before the strike has been taken, apart from the blessings of family life, you know, and even that's being encroached upon by A, its impact on my mental health, and B, the rumours. I mean, the kids in the playground, whisper, you know, stairs on the playground, you know, the funny looks, etc. You know, and then only last week an article's come out in a paper. Again, I'm not going to send traction to it, but that I'm running some sort of stalker syndicate going after a Thai massage parlour owner and a copper over in Costa Rica. And it came out. I mean, I'm trying to get it reversed and taken away. It's already been published. I told the journalist, don't publish it because it's the other way around. I've got all the evidence, sent her all the evidence. She published it anyway. And you write to the Press Standards Commission, and they're not interested in investigating it. I wrote to the editor, and the editor just came back and said, well, you were found guilty by the GMC of harassment. You've got a pattern of behaviour, so we think our article about you is wholly accurate. It's wholly inaccurate, wholly libelous. And my neighbours read that, because it's a double page spread in a multinational paper. 1 million people read that. And they're reading about, I don't run a syndicate of, like I said, 6 men. I've got 6 men working for me. It's just insane. And they're talking about all this stuff. And I know the other side of the story, but no one wants to listen to that context. I'll fully put my hands up occasionally, I'll react. But that's the key. And even the police said a few weeks ago, you can't take a tweet in isolation. So this is I'll openly talk about it. So one of my victims I was being interviewed for was the editor. And that's all I can say of one of the papers. And he posted all these articles about me in quick time. And I felt that it was vendetta journalism. So she gave me 2 tweets, and I'll use one as an example. I talked about journalism generally. I said, journalists should have integrity. If Mr. X had integrity, he would have asked me my side of the story, I'm paraphrasing slightly, and given me a right to reply. Then he would have realised that I was not allowed any witnesses. My witness statement was heavily redacted, etc., etc. I then put hashtag kangaroo court, hashtag hatchet job, talking about the tribunal, and a picture of a meme of a hatchet waggling back and forwards. She passed it to me and she said, "This is a death threat to the editor." Honestly, I nearly fell off my chair laughing. I said, are you serious? You can't be serious. And she said, yeah, absolutely. I've read it that way. My sergeant's read it that way. And the person it's written about has read it that way. I said, have you never heard of the phrase a hatchet job? Seriously, is this all you've got? And this is when I pulled out my folder. I said, look, my pile's bigger than yours. You got 2 tweets. I've got loads more to show you, Mr. Cartland, as they like to refer to me as. I said, well, show me a couple more, because what you showed me so far isn't evidence of anything. Now let me show you my folder. Oh, no, can't touch it. In the end, I terminated the interview and I left it with them. I said, look, if you're not going to look at my evidence, I'm just going to leave it, make you look at it. And I walked out. I've heard nothing since. But this is the latest layer of deconstructing my life. Frequent trips to the police station, answering frivolous complaints. And when I did an SAR, it's quite funny. The GMC have received, as I said at the start, 264 complaints out of nowhere, 259 thrown out. That tells you that there is coordinated, vexatious and malicious reporting because they're not acting upon it. The FA in a recent SAR disclosed to me that they were receiving 20 complaints a week about me, not about football, about social media, things that I posted that were allegedly homophobic, transphobic, etc., according to the public. And then I did one for DBS and I did one for the police. The police told me verbally, and haven't confirmed, they've been receiving hundreds of complaints about me. I've never been arrested once. I've not been charged with anything. Again, I'm saying to the FA and the police, well, if you're receiving 20 reports about David Cartland and not acting on any of them, because I'm not aware that any have been acted upon from that 20 times over many weeks, and then the police are receiving hundreds, then why can't you compare notes and, solve this riddle and see that these people are coordinatedly reporting me to every organisation?
Because I believe the police are probably part of it.
Yeah. I mean, people say don't feed the trolls, don't respond to them, don't give them the oxygen. So I spent about 2 or 3 weeks. I locked down my accounts and went to private mode. And in that 2-3 weeks, we started getting the emails, the malicious emails, sexually explicit. We got calls from Bernardo's, Cornwall Children's Services, neighbours, ex-wife. Going, I've just had a call from the same journalist who wrote that article after I was struck off, contacted my ex-wife to get a hit piece on, can you tell us what a bastard Dave Cartland was, during your marriage? What sort of filth is that? Journalism, approaching ex-wives.
Well, this is why it disappoints me that people still buy the bloody newspapers, because it is nothing but trash.
It's trash, and I found that out, unfortunately. But some people do. They still believe in the BBC. They do read the tabloids. It makes me sad in the morning when I pop into the local shop and you see them with their Sun and Daily Mirror, and you just know they're going to go and read that, digest it, believe it, live by it, and question nothing. And it's really sad because, critical thinking is all it takes. But people, I mean, in all the articles that have been written about me, not once do they actually, they use the headline, Cartland found guilty of harassment. But there's never any examples in the meat of the article. So people often say to me, well, what's the worst thing you did? And I'll say, well, go to AI and ask AI. Don't trust me. Go to AI and say, what's the worst thing that David Cartland did to deserve being struck off? And you can do that for yourself. Your viewers can do it. It comes out with, he called an obstetrician an evil bitch. And he called a scientist who happened to be a sheep farmer a sheep shagger, which I did. But it was retaliatory. This doctor, the one who I called a sheep shagger, 3, 4, 500 posts about me, publicly harassing me, bullying me, abusing me. They didn't even listen to a word of what he said to me. I just said, well, you called him a sheep. You've accused a man of bestiality. How disgusting. You've called a woman who was just following NHS
You've just been accused of being a paedophile. How disgusting.
Yeah. That's one of the other tweets that the copper showed me. She said it was about the other victim, and it said I find it really strange how my trolls look at every single post I make and they screen grab it and then they post it with a snidey comment or whatever. And so it's funny that while I've been shining a light on light sentences on paedophilia and child abuse cases that are going on, I post quite a lot about that for child safeguarding purposes, again, ironically. But none of them comment about that, to even say, well, me and Dave might disagree on COVID, but we can all agree that paedophilia is disgusting and needs, the heavy hand of the law on it. They never put that. So I put that into a tweet. I find it odd that all my trolls constantly post about me day in, day out, every post except my posts calling out light sentences on paedophiles. And I put hashtag hard drive checks incoming. That's what I put as hashtag. She passed it to me. She goes, how would you like to be called a paedophile? I said, excuse me, I've got 3 accounts at the moment on X purposely set up to call me a paedophile. Cartland, they call me Nonceland. It's the latest. There's even a YouTube channel about me dancing around in my ref's gear, saying, I'd love to referee a match, but I can't because I'm on the nonce list, apparently. And this is all going on. The cops won't look at that, by the way. It's just horrific.
I haven't seen any of your ones, but I know there's a retard on YouTube that does one of me, Mark Steele, Richard Vobes. You may well be on there.
They're probably common. They're probably common trolls, to be honest. So all the names on that list, we're all in the same kind of.
They're definitely 77th Brigade.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's 77th is my opinion, but there are sprinklings of other kind of NGOs involved. So there's companies that you see things like CCDH. There's Project Halo were heavily involved at the beginning of the COVID pandemic. Again, a bunch of doctors and scientists paid heavily by pharmaceutical industry to keep the narrative safe and effective. You can read about it. Project Halo. It's not Dave Cartland's made up. You've got CCDH. You've got Hope Not Hate. All these organisations set up to create a veneer that they're there to stop bullying and misinformation. Who would argue against that? But what they do in their day-to-day activity is bully and hate and abuse.
You've also got the Say No to Racism, who have just been campaigning about welcome illegal immigrants, but not here. Not here. We don't want them here. Oh,
yeah, it's when they go around with the mic and saying, have you got a spare room at your house?
I would, but it's only a small room.
My landlord wouldn't allow me.
That's incredible. Listen, thank you so much for laying your life out on the line, really, and telling us just exactly what it is that you've had to go through. I wish I had some kind of magical remedy or wise words to offer you. All I can do, my friend, is hope this gets out to as many people as possible, and wish you all the very best for you and your family.
No, thank you. Thanks for having me. And like I said at the beginning, the objective is to raise awareness, because the public, if you type in my name, are only going to see that one version, and it's wholly inaccurate. Anyone who knows me personally knows that I'm not that person that they created. And that's the same for, I find it difficult to explain why me, because I'm not a celebrity. I'm not a major influencer. I'm not a Hollywood actor or footballer. I'm Dave Cartland in Cornwall. But what I really want people to do is be angry about this, not in a violent way, not in an aggressive way, just to feel the injustice of this. A good man, a good doctor, a family man, a Christian man, having his life decimated and taking his football away from him as well. More than anything, just let me play bloody football again.
For all the men. See, luckily for me, I'm not. As you can see from my physique, I don't really do sport, but all the men watching this, I should imagine that's like, oh, bastards. Yeah.
Very topical in the World Cup as well.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Oh dear. But yeah, all the best. I really do. I hope things in the end work out in your favour.
No, thank you. And thanks for having me once again.
Absolutely. My pleasure. Right. There you go. I hope everyone's enjoyed this. I say enjoyed this, probably not quite the right word to use given what you've been talking about, but I hope people have listened. Please like and share the video, help Dave get the message out, and until next time, look after yourselves. I shall see you in the next one. Bye for now.